and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, and we are back to have another conversation about the future of sustainability, about the future of our planet and nature. You know, Russia's unprovoked war on Ukraine is a terrible human tragedy that will have long-term environmental impacts. In the wake of the invasion, people and governments are focusing on getting enough natural gas and oil to heat homes and provide electricity, and not just in Europe, which is heavily dependent on Russian fossil fuels. The result is an apparent resurgence of oil and gas exploration, which could lead to more greenhouse gas emissions. On the other hand, Europe and other nations that are dependent on Russian oil have begun discussing renewable energy projects that would free them from that dependence. I'm pleased to welcome back to the show Stephen-Crolius of Carbon Neutral Consulting, who last visited to talk about the role of ammonia in reducing ocean shipping greenhouse gas emissions. He's been watching the Russian oil and gas issue and argues that while fossil fuel energy may cost consumers more in the short run, we should not double down on gas, oil, and coal. He says turning to renewables now will be, quote, a better outcome for the climate and the worse for autocratic regimes that are propped up by the export of fossil fuel commodities, unquote. We can certainly use a little less tyranny in this world. Let's see if Vladamir Putin has shot the Russian oil industry in the foot. You can find out more about Carbon Neutral Consulting at Carbon Neutral Consulting, all one word, no dashes, no spaces, carbonneutralconsulting.com. Welcome back to the show, Steve. How are you?
Thank you, Mitch. I'm great, thank you.
Well, hey, thanks for taking time to talk about this. It's a really important issue, and I want to start off with the obvious question. When Putin started the war, did he ignite a new era of oil and gas exploration, or did he potentially accelerate the end of the fossil fuel era?
Well, I think there is actually a lot less in that situation than meets the eye. Mm-hmm. I think one way of reframing the question is to say, does anything about the war in Ukraine change the worldview of oil and gas executives? Mm-hmm. And oil and gas, as much as any industry in the economy, is driven by considerations of risk, and it's easy to visualize the kind of technical risks that oil and gas executives ponder when they're thinking about a new extraction play. Mm-hmm. And technical risks is how much will it cost us to reach a reservoir of fossil commodities, and how much is there, how easy will it be to pull out. Those are the technical risks. Increasingly, however, on top of the technical risks are risks that you could call political risks. Mm-hmm. And those are related to, driven by the energy transition, the fact that we are in an energy transition. And when looking at those kinds of investments in possible extraction plays, oil and gas executives are looking over a period of decades, not years, quite a long time to bring up, to actually just put the assets in place to extract the commodities, and then quite a long time during which the extraction will take place. So again, decades, not years. So when you look at the situation, the war in Ukraine through that lens, multi-decade risk horizon versus this war, mm-hmm. It just doesn't look like the war is. It comes off looking like the war is horrific. I don't want to in any way say anything that implies that I'm under appreciating how horrific the war is, but in a multi-decade horizon, it's I think really more of a blip than a major event. And even the blip, maybe there's less there than meets the eye, in that I think it's reasonably certain that Russian oil and gas is finding its way to other customers, even as it's not finding its way to to Europe and other destinations. So the idea that somehow there's this, sort of major upheaval because of Russian oil and gas being shut off. And then finally, there's the reality that lots and lots of relevant parties are finding this, to be one more reason to move ahead, to accelerate the process of moving off of oil and gas.
So, Steve, let's unpack several things you just said. First off, there is certainly a continuing flow of oil from Russia. India and several other nations are buying it. They're getting a great price, in fact, because Putin needs to sell enough oil to finance the economy and the war. And on the other hand, even before the war began in the U.S., companies like ExxonMobil earned record profits last year, $23 billion there. BP, a European, used to be British Petroleum, earned $12.8 billion. Is oil enjoying a resurgence? Is it a phenomenon of the end of the pandemic combined with the war? And does that portend potentially increased investment in extraction over the course of the next decade?
Yeah, well, here again, I think it's important to look at current trends in a long-term context. And the rate of profitability that the oil companies reported in 2021 looked very robust compared to the losses that they took in 2020.
Right.
But 2020 was an exceptional year. If you go back in the decade before, the 2010 to 2020 decade, profits of the oil companies were pretty steady.
Yeah.
Ticked right along, and yes, 2021 was a really good year, but it was not like it was 3x what they'd ever made before. It was more like, I don't have the figures at my fingertips, but it might have been up by 1.2 or 1.3. So
but that is a rate of return that investors might be looking for in terms of stability, particularly with everything else going on with the economy right now. Are we now facing a lack of willingness on the part of those executives you were describing earlier to accelerate their move to post-carbon energy?
My experience interacting with oil and gas companies, and I've had occasion to do so numerous occasions over the last several years, is these companies, none of these companies are monoliths. There is, in most, if not all of them, a division or several divisions that are focused on renewables, and just generally the energy transition overall. And my belief is that those divisions operate with a pretty high degree of continuity and autonomy. The expectation is you put us in position so that when things do shift, we will not lose out. Whereas in other parts of the company, they are looking to continue their traditional business and make the investments in new extraction. But at the top of the company, in the executive suite, they are, needing to balance, the continuity of oil and gas against the disruption of the energy transition. And I go back to what I said a few minutes ago. I mean, I just don't think that the war in Ukraine is having any significant impact on how they're looking at opportunities and risks.
So could the enhanced revenue that they're enjoying right now also accelerate their transition to renewables? Could this actually fund more investment on their part?
Well,
or do you see a lack of will there?
I'd say yes, it could, but they make so much money. It's not like that's what's holding them back. I mean, they make a they make a lot of money, and they with all a lot of these are public companies, and they need to keep their eye on how investors are regarding them, and they will make their decisions about more into energy transition type activities, or to continue with the traditional oil and gas, based on what they think is going to keep their share prices up at attractive levels.
Well, let me ask this then, because the United States has made a number of policy decisions, or announced a number of policy decisions in the last few weeks that are response to the war. I guess the question are these misplaced decisions? So President Biden temporarily lifted restrictions on gasoline ethanol blends that contribute to more smog and warm weather. They opened some on and offshore locations to drilling. They released oil from the strategic reserve in order to counter rising gasoline prices. And they're also working out a deal that to provide liquid natural gas to Europe that is a decade long. Are all of these an overreaction to the fact that Russian oil and gas may be cut off to Europe for a short period of time?
I think that some may be an overreaction, and some are very appropriate. Clearly, in a crisis or a potential crisis, I think the war in Ukraine has a number of crisis elements, but it's for people in Western Europe, it's more a potential crisis of loss of energy supplies. And so, given when faced with a potential crisis, the thing to do is head that potential crisis off. No one is going to come out ahead by letting that crisis build and turn into an actual crisis. And no one is doesn't make sense for the United States or the world to say to the Europeans, oh, well, just do without the European gas that you've been used to, and maybe you'll be a little cold next winter, or your economy is going to go into recession, but just suck it up and that'll be good for the rest of the world. That's obviously not going to play out that way.
Well, so for instance, releasing some of the oil from the strategic reserve is I think you're agreeing with me that this is a rational response to the rising gas prices. But for instance, the long-term LNG agreement with Europe is going to require some significant capital investment to just follow through on and deliver over the course of the next decade. Is that something that we should be thinking about continuing to do, or maybe we ought to reel that one back in?
Well, yes, it's an excellent question and a very fair point. Because the European economy runs so much on natural gas, it's hard to have a proper near-term response to the potential crisis that doesn't involve ratcheting up other sources, alternative sources of natural gas that don't come from Russia. So I don't think it would be a terribly credible response by the West to the potential crisis to not include some type of natural gas investment. However, here's something that may not be readily apparent to people who aren't focusing intently on the development of the hydrogen economy. It is possible to build LNG infrastructure in a way that is future-proofed. And by that I mean you can, with a small, 5 to 10% extra investment, you can build that infrastructure in a way that you can convert it over to handle ammonia at a point in the future where it makes sense to do so. And the company, the engineering, procurement, construction company, Black & Veatch, published a white paper on this within the last year. It's very well done, very interesting, and extremely relevant to this conversation, because we could build that LNG capacity in a unenlightened way, and as you say, have this infrastructure that's just, like an albatross around our neck with fossil fuels, or it can be nimble, flexible, and when conditions evolve, it can pivot to being supportive of a sustainable energy economy.
That's an interesting angle on that. I had not thought about the fact that you could take the same infrastructure and simply migrate it to the next fuel. Well, let me ask about another nation that has taken a different strategy, or at least they're talking about taking a different strategy, and that's Germany, who wants to accelerate their transition to renewables by as much as a decade. But there isn't necessarily a great deal of substance there. Does the German plan actually represent a model we should be considering, or is it just more talk?
Well, I think the key word there is acceleration. The Germans have been proactive for a number of years in thinking about their economy, their use of energy, and alternative sources of energy, sustainable sources of energy. And so it is not at all the case that faced with this new crisis coming out of the Ukraine war, Germany is trying to figure something out. My perception is that Germany has already been has been engaged in planning efforts and actually starting to implement of a number of things that will transition their economy to their energy economy to sustainability. And so things like more onshore and offshore wind, for example. Germany is thinking a lot about hydrogen, the use of hydrogen, literally hydrogen, elemental hydrogen as an energy commodity. I'd say one of the global leaders in thinking about how to build a hydrogen infrastructure. I personally am not so sure about infrastructure for elemental hydrogen, but that's one man's opinion. I take my hat off to the Germans and being quite bold and advancing some of these ideas.
So let me take this from a slightly different angle. Does that make Germany potentially more competitive as a nation than the United States or, say, France, who are not necessarily on the same trajectory, and particularly here where we are so wedded to oil and gas that we may watch while Germany and other countries race ahead and become the leaders in renewable?
Yeah, I think that is certainly the dynamic at play in the world today. Just about any other developed economy, Russia aside, is doing more faster than the United States. Japan is clearly a leader in a lot of this of necessity. We, however, have, I guess we're now the second largest economy in the world after China. And if you're big like that, you can afford to not be out in front. But you do have to stay in the race.
Right.
And I generally feel positive about the steps that the Biden administration has been taking. In the real world of politics, it's not going to be all one shade of green or red.
Right.
But generally, I feel like the Biden administration is doing good things, trying to do good things, and will keep the United States in the pack with the other countries that are moving in a responsible way to develop sustainable energy.
If you were sitting in the room with President Biden now, what would you encourage him to really hone in on, and what would you suggest he tell the oil and gas company about what we should all be doing as a nation in response to this change in the dynamics of the oil market?
Yeah, so I'm going to go right at that sharp point of your question. Let's pretend that President Biden is having communications with, we shouldn't pretend, President Biden is having communications with oil and gas executives from time to time. My counsel to President Biden is based on the idea that business people like predictability above all. Mm-hmm. They probably like predictability. If you can give them predictability, accompanied with a policy they don't like versus policy they do like, but who knows what's going to happen, they would probably take predictability. And part of predictability is staying within the limits of what you can control. So my advice to President Biden would be to say, to always emphasize to the oil and gas executives what his administration's intentions are, and not to overstate what the administration might be able to accomplish, given some of the challenges with other actors in the political system.
Well, let's talk about another actor in the political system. 435 of them in the House and another 100 in the Senate. What about Congress and how they're handling clean energy and climate funding? There's $550 billion in funding that's just basically held up right now. Should we be focusing on passing that bill and getting that capital deployed into the economy?
Well, yes, we certainly should. The fact that it's not clear whether we're going to just fits into the narrative that we all have about, Congress as a dysfunctional institution. And certainly we could go down that track, but I would prefer to maybe take a more positive approach here. Okay. And recognize that Congress has done some notable good things over the years, over the last 10, 12 years, sometimes on a non-controversial bipartisan basis. But the thing I'll point to right now is as you know, Mitch, Carbon Neutral Consulting, among other areas, focuses on transportation electrification. Mm-hmm. And one of the particular areas, one of the vehicle types that were worked to help move toward greater use of electricity is school buses. Mm-hmm. And last year, Congress passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and that included $5 billion with a B to $2.5 billion that was specifically for electric school buses, and another $2.5 billion for quote unquote clean school buses, which would include electric school buses. I can tell you from the school bus perspective, that is close to being transformative. That's the sort of the classic game changer, where all of a sudden there's this very large amount of money coming to electric school buses. The electric school bus industry has been already has been offering electric school buses for the last 3-4 years, but this is just, as I say, this just changes the game.
So, for instance,
that's a direct result of a bill that was passed by Congress.
So perhaps you would tell President Biden to have the United States Postal Service electrify its fleet, which is an issue that is still up in the air. Because as the largest purchaser in the world at this point, they have the opportunity to shape the economy and individual industries by pouring money in to lower the cost of production simply through volume. Could we be using federal money to electrify all of the things we depend on for government services, and could that pull the rest of the economy along?
Yes. Absolutely yes. Beyond any shadow of a doubt, that would be very significant, very helpful. The specific thing you just referred to with the Postal Service and apparently a recent decision to not go electric, I can't tell you how frustrated that makes me. That is just so obviously wrong-headed. I I attended some meetings with a certain branch of the Postal Service in 2010, 2011, that time frame. They were very interested in the prospects for, electric vehicles at that time, and should they be, when they're talking about replacing their fleet of postal delivery vehicles, which was in play at that time. And I was as emphatic as I could be. Yes, this would be a very good thing for the Postal Service to do, for the Postal Service, for the country, for the world. And here we are in 2022, and somehow, it's not
still
going
debating
the
the
right way.
question, and Louis DeJoy is in charge and doing whatever he wants, it seems like. So how about this? This is another question for the president. Should he use the Defense Production Act to drive renewable energy development, drive EV battery manufacturing, heat pump production to retrofit homes and buildings? Would that be another important and potentially very impactful decision?
I'm going to say no to that.
Really?
Yes, because we can have a sort of a broad philosophical question about how well the economy that we have today,
Mm-hmm.
the capitalist economy, how well it meets human needs. We can have that broad philosophical discussion. There's certainly a lot to be said about how it could work better. But I feel like one thing that society has tried in the 20th century is top-down economic initiatives from governments. And maybe in the context of a severe immediate crisis like a pandemic,
Right.
and a very clear, sharp need of more respirators, maybe then a top-down government effort would be the right approach. But for the kinds of things that you mentioned, my belief is that the current economy is actually doing a pretty good job of bringing these things into existence, and having a sort of a top-down planned approach is just not going to do anything, not going to help the situation.
So in contrast to being the largest customer who can make a decision and buy, therefore pulling the market, you don't think that pushing the market is the right way to go at this point, because it's already moving in that direction?
I agree with you 100% with that.
Okay.
That's a very good way to set it up.
Okay. Well, so Steve, what should we watch for in terms of debates and policy decisions over the next few months as Ukraine continues to play out and we're all trying to figure out what the future of energy is?
I think, throughout our conversation here, Mitch, I am tending to downplay the near term as something that's a context in which we can make shifts in course in a productive way. And that's really how I am inclined to respond to your question here. I think that it will be very important to help the Europeans with their near-term energy needs. The world needs to help the Europeans, and obviously the United States has a huge role to play there. And so within that context, yes, we can keep our eye on sort of evolving discussions about how LNG, more American LNG can move to Europe and that sort of thing. And back to the point about, let's try to build the infrastructure in a smart way,
right?
Future-proof sort of way. But beyond that, the energy transition, the players that are contributing to the energy transition are just going full speed. And, we're all citizens of the world, and we're aware of what's going on with Russia and Ukraine and all of that. But in a way, it doesn't matter, because the energy transition is happening.
Well, that's encouraging.
Going to continue to happen. This I'm so sure. I spend all of my working time living in this world of the energy transition, and it's a factor of 100 more more strands of it than any individual can keep up with. It's complex, it's multifaceted, and it's practical. It's happening today. We're well past the talking stage. We're in the hard assets going in the ground stage.
So let me ask this, circling back to the first question, and is Putin undercutting his nation's future economy by focusing on both ground war acquisition of territory and oil as the basis of their economy? Is he not serving his people well?
Clearly, he is not serving his people well. Clearly, he is in, as regards this particular, if we look at the situation through the lens of energy and the energy transition, he is putting Russia in a zone in which it will be increasingly difficult, even after the war ends, increasingly difficult for Russia to find its footing as a player in the energy transition. The isolation from the rest of the world, and Putin seems to have gone into the war thinking that the world could not do without Russian oil and gas.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the rude surprises that has encountered, is that the world is now very busy at doing without Russian oil and gas.
Well, Steve, that actually is a very encouraging place to end this conversation. I want to thank you for taking some time to talk with us today.
Well, thank you again for having me, Mitch.
Always a pleasure. We've been speaking with Steve Crolius. He's with Carbon Neutral Consulting, and you can learn more about Carbon Neutral Consulting at carbonneutralconsulting.com. It's all one word, no spaces, no dashes, carbonneutralconsulting.com. It's encouraging to hear what he said about the inevitability of the carbon transition and the fact that we are continuing to move down that path, regardless of the things going on in Russia and Ukraine, which are absolutely horrendous, but thankfully don't seem to be taking people's eye off the renewable ball. The problem I think we all face is that our news cycle focuses on the conversations about potential reaction rather than the actual actions that we're taking. And so there's a lot of give and take, a lot of conversation about what we might do and the potential consequences of it that get covered without reiterating the fact that we haven't really changed direction that much. So another way to think about the problems of media and social media is to constantly come back to ask the question, what really changed here? Probably getting too theoretical in my social media and news analysis with this, but the fact is, we're on our path and we need to stay there. And what Steve says is, I think, well taken. Not a lot has changed because of Ukraine, but we should keep in mind that we need to get there and stay the course. This is Mitch Ratcliffe. We're going to come back with another innovator interview in the near future. In the meantime, I hope you take a few minutes to share this conversation and all the others that we've done with your friends and family. Let's get everyone thinking about more ideas in order to create less waste. We're going to be back soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.